starting to rain out here, so I'm going to go back inside and tell you a little bit more about it. Let's go.
Alright, so let's talk about Hugelculture while I prepare the beds. So what is Hugelculture? Simply put, it's in-bed composting where you bury wood or other biomass below your bed. The practice has been utilized in Europe for hundreds of years, and I've recently learned about it through a buddy who backpacked through Europe and saw it in action on his trip. Have you ever heard of Hugelculture? It's kind of a funny name, but it works awesome. They basically bury logs underneath the dirt, and then they plant crops on top. You should try it. No, I hadn't heard of Hugelculture, but interestingly enough, I'd already been doing something similar. I don't have a lot of space in my backyard for a big compost pile, so in the fall I'll rake all my leaves and twigs and stuff into piles and put them towards the back of the yard. When it warms up and it's time to plant, I'll either mix them into the vegetable garden or dig out a little bit of dirt and put a layer below. Those sorts of amendments are definitely needed because I have really rocky clay soil. Hey look, a potato! Sometimes these beds are more of a rock garden than a vegetable garden. This pile of rocks is from one small area, and I've been picking rocks out of here for years. And here's one of the piles where I've been dumping my smaller rocks. And I just pulled this one out this year. Check out this big boy. If you got any ideas on what to do with all these rocks, let me know. Let's get back on topic here. The idea behind Hugelculture is that the decaying biomass will promote water retention and soil warming. Microorganisms like bacteria and fungi will help break down the material into rich compost. And critters like earthworms will move in and help aerate the soil. Now if you think about it, this mimics the process that happens naturally in a forest. Trees fall down and start to rot and are covered up with moss and leaves, and eventually they become part of the forest floor. According to the research I've done, Hugelculture is well suited for areas with poor rocky soil, and I think that fits my garden to a T. So far you've mostly been watching me work while I explained Hugelculture, so let's dig into things a little bit more and I'll show you how I set up the beds. In the first bed I used mostly logs that I'd collected during a windstorm and didn't have a use for. I started out with the larger logs on the bottom, then added a layer of dirt and filled it in with some smaller logs on top. The layering idea is to expose as much of the surface area of the wood as possible to the soil and aid in the decomposition process. And as we all know, once wood comes into contact with soil, it'll start to rot pretty quickly. Now for the remaining beds, what I did was just use an assortment of what I had on hand, so the remaining sod from where I edged around the beds, and some of the leaves and twigs that I had picked up during my spring cleanup. The only other things I want to do here is add some compost on top of the beds, and then mulch in between the rows. I've got a ton more work to do in the garden, and I'm going to share some of that with you. To help put that in perspective, what I wanted to do is just give you a brief tour of my backyard, and show you some of the different gardening projects I've got going on. Let's go! Here's an apple tree I planted 4 or 5 years ago, and it's not really growing that well. Part of the reason might be because there's this really big walnut tree in my neighbor's yard. Behind that's the berry patch, and this I just put in last year. I'd actually been growing wild blackberries back here for probably 10 years, and unfortunately they got infected with orange rust, and last year I took the step to just replace everything, and I built these trellises. I actually did a quick little video on that, basically just using pressure-treated landscaping timbers and some pieces of old fence. So far everything seems to be growing really well, and I didn't really do anything fancy here other than put down some mulch and fertilize a bit. Out in the front of the patch I've got some rhubarb mixed in with some ornamental plants. I'm looking forward to a berry rhubarb pie this summer, and I've definitely got some mulching to do here too. On the side of the house I've got some black currants and gooseberries growing, and I planted these probably 4 years ago. I haven't harvested anything significant yet, but last year I just put down mulch, and the plants look a lot more robust this year, so maybe I'll get some pie or jam out of them this year. Finally I have some asparagus and hops planted towards the back of my vegetable garden. This asparagus is probably 4 years old, and I've been layering it up with compost every year, but definitely needs a bit more, so I think I'm going to hit it with some mulch this year. And that pretty much covers all the edible plants in my garden, so hope you enjoyed this brief tour, and we'll see you next time. Cheers!